A man is accused of brutally killing a social worker after she supposedly accidentally knocked on his door. And guess what? He reportedly claimed he acted in self-defense. It is a savage and bizarre attack that we will break down with attorney Paul Townsend. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Let's go over to Westchester, New York, where Hasseem Jenkins is accused of brutally attacking social worker 56-year-old Maria Coto back on May 14th. That resulted in her being hospitalized for 36 days until she ultimately died from her injuries. And do you know what police say prompted this of all things? What prompted Jenkins to allegedly punch and kick Maria repeatedly? Because she made the horrible, unforgivable mistake of knocking on the wrong apartment door. She supposedly mistakenly knocks on Jenkins' door thinking it was a client. And if that's true, that deserves him allegedly killing her, repeatedly punching her in the face, chasing her into a neighbor's apartment as she seemingly tried to run away, going in, continually kicking her in the head while wearing heavy boots. This is sick, sick stuff. Now, yes, allegations, he's innocent until proven guilty, but we will talk about this. We will talk about the evidence because she was apparently able to call 911. They arrive, police arrive, and Jenkins allegedly starts cursing at them and Maria, and then he allegedly asked police if he killed anyone after he was arrested. And then he allegedly suggested to police that she tried to stab him. He allegedly said to police that he grabbed her hair and began punching her because he thought she was going to attack him. So now he's being charged with murder, possession, burglary, that's for entering the apartment to chase and attack Maria, and also robbery after he allegedly took Maria's phone. He has pled not guilty. He is being held without bail. His next court appearance is August 6th. The Westchester County District Attorney Miriam E. Roca came out and said, quote, Maria Coto was performing her job when she became the victim of a ruthless and brutal attack that led to her tragic death. We are committed to securing justice for Miss Coto. For that, I want to bring in right now New York attorney Paul Townsend. Paul, thanks so much for coming on. You're from New York. Westchester crimes in Westchester, I don't hear happening so much, or particularly something like this. It's kind of a shock to the system when you hear these allegations, right?
Absolutely. When you think of a brutal attack like this, typically you're expecting to hear that it happened, in the South Bronx or in certain sections of Brooklyn or maybe Queens. But Westchester County is not where you would typically find, just a brutal assault like this that winds up with a woman dead. It doesn't typically happen there.
Hey, everybody, I want to take a quick sidebar from Sidebar to tell you guys about Wondery's awesome podcast, American Scandal. You can listen right now and explore the biggest political corruption scheme in U.S. history. Using vivid and immersive storytelling, American Scandal retraces the bribes, players, and underhanded deals related to the Teapot Dome scandal. In 1922, newspapers reported that Secretary of the Interior Albert Fall had leased federally owned oil reserves to two of the nation's wealthiest oil barons, Edward Doheny and Harry Sinclair. Fall had made the deals to enrich himself, and all three men were charged with defrauding the U.S. government. The scandal, named after one of the oil reserves in Wyoming, would eventually send Sinclair to prison for contempt of Congress and jury tampering, and made Fall the first person ever convicted of a crime committed while serving in the U.S. cabinet. Follow American Scandal on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can binge this season, American Scandal Teapot Dome, early and ad-free right now at wondery.fm/LC Sidebar. Okay, so now let me ask you, what on earth could be a defense here? I kind of laid it out a little bit. Is he going to be trying to say self-defense, which I don't know how that works when you allegedly chase the person, right?
So he's represented right now by legal aid, and I can't see a world in which a legal aid attorney or any criminal defense attorney is going to try and argue self-defense. I think the only real chance, given the circumstances of this, is a mental disease defense. I think he's got to be evaluated a real mental health professional needs to sit down with him and perform a forensic evaluation and determine whether or not he really can appreciate the nature and character of his actions. Because I mean, it's rare that you have a situation like this where he is still on scene when police arrive. There's multiple 911 calls. He makes certain statements that are fairly incriminating. Did I kill anybody back there? And then she tried to stab me. He's found reportedly with her phone in his pocket after chasing her into somebody else's apartment. I mean, these are really, really gruesome facts, and there's not a lot of play for a defense attorney to claim, it was a misidentification, it was somebody else, he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. So I think, really his best and maybe even only chance for some kind of favorable resolution is if he is found, to have a mental disease or defect.
In other words, just to be clear, were you talking like an insanity type defense? Because the idea of him saying, did I kill anybody? You could say on one hand, oh, wow, he really doesn't understand or appreciate what he did or what he allegedly did. But he almost does, right? He almost seems to recognize what his actions were after the fact. But even if that's the case, those are notoriously hard to put forward and hard to use. Do you see something based on this fact pattern that would make you think that that would actually work?
To be clear, no. I don't think that based on the fact pattern that he would have a successful mental disease or defect defense. I just think that that might be the only option given the nature of what we've seen here. You're right. What is colloquially called the insanity defense, which I don't like using that term because it feels like it diminishes a little bit. It's really a mental disease or defect defense. Those are incredibly difficult to prove. I've argued a number of cases where I had what I thought was real strong evidence that a client of mine really suffered from a debilitating mental illness that deprived him of his ability to really understand the nature of what he was doing. And it's very difficult to convince a jury because most juries look at that and think, oh, he's trying to get off on a technicality. Oh, he's faking. Oh, he's fabricating this. And it's very difficult to prove to a jury because, the burden then shifts to the defense. When you introduce that, it's an affirmative defense. You have to convince a jury that this is what the real situation is. And they can consider things like consciousness of guilt when they're looking at this. So when he makes statements like, oh, did I kill anybody? A jury is entitled to hear a statement like that and think, okay, so he clearly understood what he was doing because he knows that there's a possibility that he did in fact kill somebody. And, after she was on a ventilator for, over a month, ultimately he did kill somebody.
And just to clarify this one more point, the best case scenario for him then would not be prison time, but a mental health institution for the remainder of his life?
Well, maybe. So the way that a successful mental disease or defect defense works is, you're right, you don't go to prison, but you do get put in a secure psychiatric facility. But you're not kept there necessarily for life. You're kept there until you're deemed basically not to be a danger to society anymore. So whereas if you're convicted of a crime, you get an actual sentence. You serve a period of time, and when that period of time is over, you're let go. You can start ticking down the days from the minute you get in. But when you're put in a secure psychiatric facility, it's up to you need a certain number of doctors to basically sign off that you are no longer a danger. So that could be 6 months, it could be 50 years. You just don't know. And you don't have, a calendar that you can go to say, okay, this is my date out. You're just there until you're determined fit to leave.
And to be clear, I don't see based on this fact pattern that having much success. He also took the phone. They said he chased her. He made some comments as well. And look, he's been charged with murder with intent and also murder committed in the course of another felony. Why was he hit with both murder charges there?
So the different murder charges have different elements, so they can be charged simultaneously. So he has the intentional murder, which is the allegation that he intended to cause the death of another person and did so. And we have, Maria Coto dying, so they make that out. But he's also charged with the felony murder. And what what that means is that during the course of another felony that he's committing, he causes the death of somebody. So in this case, he's charged with burglary for pursuing her into somebody else's dwelling for the purpose of assaulting her. He's charged with assault in the first degree. He's charged with robbery for the forcible taking of her phone. So if the jury finds that maybe, he intended to assault her and he intended to cause her harm, but maybe he didn't actually intend to kill her, then they might acquit him of the intentional murder charge. But if they find that he caused her death while in furtherance of assaulting her, let's say, then they can still technically find him guilty of the felony murder. So it allows the Westchester DA a little bit of latitude to say, even if a jury doesn't think that he intended to kill her, we can still convict him of murder.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, the union came forward, and now apparently social workers, they have to have an escort with them when necessary, and they also can carry a panic button. What do you make of that change? What do you make of this? Because again, the idea of a social worker going to a house to check on something that's happening, and this is what results, this seems like the kind of change that might be necessary.
I certainly think that the intention behind it to make sure that social workers are safe is very laudable. You hate to think that a woman in her 50s who has dedicated herself to caring for others has the unfortunate miscue of knocking on the wrong door and winds up dead for it. That is such a horrible situation. And the idea that now maybe they carry panic buttons or they're escorted, certainly one would hope that would cut down on something like this happening in the future. So I, to the extent that it might prevent something like this, I think it's worthwhile.
By the way, can her family file a lawsuit, not against the defendant here necessarily? Can they file a lawsuit against her employer?
So civil law is not really my forte, but from law school, I do remember that in any civil lawsuit, there are basically 4 elements: duty, breach, causation, damages. So you have to show one of those is breach. So you would have to argue that the union or the agency, the social work agency that she was working for, in some way breached a duty to her and actually caused her damage. So I think that would be difficult under these circumstances, because you can't really make out a claim that the agency is directly responsible here. We know who's responsible. Allegedly, he's innocent until proven guilty, as you said. But Hasseem Jenkins is charged with this crime. He's not charged with acting in concert with the social services agency. So I think it would be difficult. Now, you might have some potential if the agency gave her the wrong address and had some knowledge that a violent person actually lived at that address. But I think that would be, there would have to be a lot of very tenuous things to come together. I don't see it.
I don't see it either, because there has to be that element of foreseeability, and who could foresee something like this happening. Let me end on this, talking a little bit more about Maria Coto. So Maria's goddaughter, Judy Yanes, came out and said justice for her is for him to be incarcerated for the rest of his life. Maria's aunt, Maria Gutierrez, said, "So much that my niece suffered, and it's not fair. I want to remember her as a great person with a big heart. That's how she was, and I miss her a lot." Just a really, really sad situation, sad case, should not have happened. We will see how it works its way through the court system. Paul Townsend, thank you so much for coming on to break it down with us. Always appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time.